Well, happening today, thousands will join together at the Wall of Honor in Lockerbie to remember the lives lost on Pan Am Flight 103. On this day, 36 years ago, the plane took off from Heathrow Airport in London, headed for New York City. A bomb hidden in the cargo exploded mid-air, killing 286 people. Since then, there has been a crusade for answers. The efforts recently led to the arrest of one man in 2022 accused of making the bomb that was on board. So joining us this morning to talk about this day in history and the push forward for justice is the father of one of the victims on that flight and board member of the Pan Am 103 Lockerbie Legacy Foundation, Paul Hudson. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, let's talk about your daughter, Melina. Tell us about her.
She was a beautiful, vivacious 16-year-old. She was a high school exchange student in Exeter, England, returning home for Christmas holiday. At the time, we lived in Albany, and many of the people who died were from New York area. The Pan Am was the iconic American airliner at the time. Out of the 270 that died, 188 were Americans. It was the second worst terrorist attack on America after 9/11, and it remains the worst, most deadly terrorist attack and the worst air disaster in British history.
Yeah, can you touch on that for a second here? Let's talk about this being a particularly vulnerable time of year for events like this, for terrorism, between administrations. Can you touch on that?
Well, in 1988, we were between the Reagan and the Bush administrations. Basically, there was no one at home. Security was quite lax at the time. It was run by the airlines and the airports. And it's a time when terrorists, unfortunately, take advantage. And we've seen that most recently yesterday in Germany. And it's not the first and probably won't be the last time it happens.
So years later, I know this is obviously will continue to be very difficult for you. Do you feel in some way that justice has been served with this arrest we saw in 2022?
Well, this is the third time that someone has been arrested. Previously, two people who were accused of planning the bombs were tried. One was convicted, Megrahi. The bomb maker is now in custody in Northern Virginia, and we expect there'll be a trial probably in the spring of next year.
I know that obviously there's going to be a memorial today to honor those who responded to the tragic scene, to honor those who lost their lives. And years later, a movie based on what happened is now being made. So why do you think it's so important to continue to tell the story of what happened on board that flight?
Well, because if we don't learn the lessons of Lockerbie, we're likely to see repetition. Unfortunately, we didn't get the lesson of aviation terrorism and aviation security until 9/11. And now we have the TSA. It's important to remember that the most deadly form of terrorism remains to be aviation terrorism, where a small bomb can kill hundreds of people. But there are other forms of terrorism also. And only with security will we see, I think, a diminishment of this. Virtually every time there's been a mass terrorist incident, it gets repeated over and over unless there are strong defensive measures.
Yeah, it's important to learn those lessons, very important ones. All right, thank you so much, Paul Hudson, for joining us this morning.